Hey everyone, it is Gabrielle again with This Millennial Nation, and today we have an awesome guest, Matthew Manos, who is the founder and managing director of Very Nice. It is an incredible company doing something that most companies wouldn't dare to do, and it is baking in giving back right into their very bottom line. They are throwing down a challenge to companies around the world to be philanthropic, to be charitable, and actually see you will be a more profitable and more fulfilled company. So Matthew, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I am going to jump into it right away and ask you, where did you come up with the idea for your company? What inspired you?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of an interesting story, and it goes back to when I was in high school, actually, when I was 16. I was skateboarding competitively back then, and so as a result, you could often find me training in skate parks. I did a lot of vert, so I was always in bowls and pools. And there was one weekend, though, that was very interesting. It was a weekend that I saw a man in a wheelchair who was ripping around the park far better than I or anybody else. He literally did a flip over one of the channels, and this obviously isn't something that you see every day. So I was pretty intrigued and rolled a little bit closer to him and realized that he wasn't alone. He was with a bunch of little kids who were also in wheelchairs. And I came to learn that he was the founder of a nonprofit organization that basically taught little kids in wheelchairs how to get around a skate park and how to participate in extreme sports. And this was in the Bay Area in the Silicon Valley where I grew up. And obviously, you know, up there, everyone is the founder of something. So it wasn't really, you know, the most unique thing in the world to meet a founder, but this was the first time I had ever met the founder of a nonprofit organization. And there was something really distinctly different about that interaction versus all of the interactions that I had had with family, friends who owned businesses, et cetera. And I think what it was just this really insane amount of passion that he displayed for this cause. You know, this was kind of the first glimpse that I had into this idea that somebody would be so passionate about a cause that they would dedicate their entire life to it. Right around that time, maybe a week prior, I had gotten my first pirated copy of Photoshop from my godmother, which I own it now, so you know, no hard feelings to Adobe, but that's how it got started.
Hey, we are scrappy, if nothing else, as millennial
That's true.
entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah, millennials don't like owning things, so no, but but we're good now. But what happened is I thought, just kind of starting to learn how to use this stuff, and I want to help this guy somehow. I don't have money, but maybe I could put these new skills to good use. And he became my first pro bono client, where I had offered to design some stickers for him to promote the organization. From there, shortly after, I went to UCLA, where I started volunteering for a lot of different student groups in a similar capacity, kind of picking up graphic design stuff here and there. That's what I was studying at school. And not only did that process help me kind of validate that this was the type of thing that I liked doing, it also really helped me start to see the return from pro bono work. So what started to happen was these presidents of these student groups would graduate, they would go get other jobs, or in some cases they would start companies. And then they would think, oh, we need a designer, who could we work with? Oh, I worked with Matt, so let's hire him again. And what happened is I started to see how this pro bono work, this volunteer work, was actually becoming reciprocal. And it planted a seed in my head of, oh, what if that actually was a viable business thing? Like, what if that was a business model where you get just as much as you give, and that's how you survive? And that's really where Very Nice then kind of came from, this idea of giving half, and that's what we do still to this day. We give half of our work away for free to nonprofit organizations.
So would you say that you are a natural entrepreneur? Is that something that you always thought you were going to do, or is it something that you just kind of stumbled upon?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it's a little mix of both. I've always been inspired by people who go out and start their own thing from being, even from a young age in high school. My mom had her own tutoring company. My dad had his own law practice. And so I was kind of surrounded by these solopreneur type of environment and mindset. And, at least knew that I loved the idea of that. I think what I didn't know is how it would immediately become my first job, essentially. So when I had first launched Very Nice, I think I was a sophomore at UCLA. I really thought of it just as a side project. This was before I had that realization that pro bono work can lead to paid work, and that there could be this reciprocity. So I thought, this is just something that I like to do at night, when nobody's looking, basically. But what
Side
started,
hustle, man. That's how I started. And
yeah.
I know that's how so many of us start. And it almost starts out like a hobby. Like, oh, this is nice. I can do this because it's fun. I feel like I'm making a difference, but I'm not hurting anybody. And so when did that moment happen for you that you realized, hey, this is actually a viable way to create a business?
Yeah, well, so part of it was when I started getting more and more paid work from these kind of referred pro bono projects. But a big part of it was actually more of just kind of a conscious decision to do this. I think that, like, at the end of the day, a lot of times that's what it takes, is just that moment where you're like, all right, you know what, this is going to go from being an extracurricular to being an actual thing that I do. And for me, I think that came when I started thinking about the other options. I was closer to graduation, so I was a couple of years into Very Nice, and I realized, you know what, I can go get a day job, work in a cubicle or something, and come home at night, not sleep, and do this. And then I remember thinking, like, gosh, that sounds awful. I would hate to basically never sleep again. And I would hate to, not make what I'm passionate about my full-time endeavor. And so that really was when I made that conscious decision to say, hey, I didn't study business, but I guess, like, I have to think about these business things now, like, what is the model behind this? How can I survive, and how can I make this happen?
Did people think that you were crazy?
Totally, totally. I mean, I think this is a common millennial story, right? Like, going to my professors or to other peers that were older than me and saying, "Hey, I want to start this company that gives." At that time, that gives all of its work away for free. It's like, sort of slowly became give half, but still, I want this company that gives half of its work away for free. And it kind of sounds like, another naive college student that wants to change the world, so it was actually very hard to get support in the early days for this kind of initiative, because it was so different. The other thing that was interesting,
and just essentially go against any sort of logic or precedence and say, no, this actually is a model that can work. How did you take that kind of evangelistic approach to sharing that your idea was going to be successful?
Yeah, I think it came from a few friends and colleagues that could see the vision. For all of the naysayers, there obviously were also people who really thought this was going to work, and I also just kind of believed in my heart that it would happen and that it would be sustainable. And I think that was partially because I kind of became obsessive around business planning. So I created a 10-year plan, when I was in my senior year of college, and like stayed up all night trying to perfect that plan. And it just kind of helped me see the light a little bit. Not that a plan always actually happens, but just thinking that long term was very helpful for me, as well. And also, about like a year in, this was before I really knew what social entrepreneurship was. This was long before there's graduate programs about social entrepreneurship and a book every
Where was
week.
that when I was in school?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And this was it was, a few years before all of that kind of mainstream social enterprise stuff. So I never really knew, like, what worlds I was talking to. I always thought, oh, it's just kind of this spot between nonprofit and for-profit. That's how I always spoke about it to people. And as time went on, what you see now too is that obviously has become so accepted to the point that it's almost the norm in business now. So watching that happen was very inspiring and kind of validating for me as well.
So what kind of training did you receive, if any, that made you prepared to jump out on your own and start your business?
I would say the nice thing about being a designer, now I'm a designer and a strategist, but they're both very similar in the sense that you're dealing with people and you're dealing with clients, and you're sending agreements and invoices and things like that. And really the best thing that I did was just start taking on some of that freelance work very early on, so that I could learn the ropes of just how all that logistical stuff works. So that really, my first few projects essentially became that training. And then a couple other things I did is I was reading books a lot about business. Social Business was a book by Muhammad Yunus that was very inspiring to me. And then my parents actually bought me Nonprofits for Dummies as well, which was super helpful. It really,
I really appreciate it. What are you trying to say?
yeah, it was very helpful in kind of just super logistics of how this stuff works. So that really, my training, I guess, was just kind of throwing myself in there and taking on projects that I was a little afraid to do.
So one thing that we're focusing a lot in our study on millennial entrepreneurs is how we approach business and profit and even relationships differently than other generations have in the past. But Matt, how would you say being a millennial entrepreneur is different than your parents, who you shared before were both entrepreneurs as well? What makes us unique?
Yeah, there's so many things that makes us unique. I think I want to talk about two of those things. So one of them, this is something that millennials get a lot of slack for, is that we kind of were that first generation to get a prize for coming in second place, or third place even, like these participation awards, right? And for all the jokes that people make about those kinds of awards, and I'm sure there are some negative repercussions in there somewhere, but I see that as a really interesting thing, because we kind of were the first generation that was rewarded for failing. And to some extent, I think that actually speaks to our ability to not be so afraid to try new things when it comes to business, or to not be afraid of failure to some extent, because as failure is a huge part of anything, or just, that willingness to be a little bit bold. So I think that that's one item. And then the other is, because we've grown up with the internet, and for most of it, for many of the millennials have grown up with social media as well. We as individuals or as businesses, now more than ever, actually have launched with a pedestal, or with a microphone. So it's funny, like a lot of businesses maybe in the boomer generation were launched without anybody knowing about them. And now, every time I send out a tweet, almost 10,000 people see it. And it's this crazy thing that everything that a millennial business that has that kind of social media ingrained within it, it's constantly speaking to the world, and so I think that that's affected us in our confidence, but also in our ability to kind of empathize with the whole world, or have this more global mindset as well.
Yeah, you definitely hit on two things that I found very, very fascinating with millennials. But one is failure, and kind of our love-hate relationship with failure, and knowing that we don't really know how to fail. So on one side, I totally agree with you. I think that it really does create in us a confidence that we're thinking if we fail, there's always someone or something to fall back on, because we don't really know failure.
Right.
But I'm curious for you, what are those moments where you were like, I have no idea what it is that I'm doing? And how did you process through that threat of failure, and knowing that you're not only, if you do fail, letting yourself down, but letting down your clients or letting down your family? Kind of explain to me that process a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one instance of failure or a fear of failure was I had mentioned earlier about writing that 10-year plan. And I think, right before it, I couldn't sleep because I was thinking about, oh man, how am I going to do this? Like, it's one thing to say, yeah, Very Nice is going to be my full-time job when you have the comfort of just the excuse of being a student, but when it's actually going to be the real thing, I remember thinking, like, will this actually work? And so that to me was a real fear of failure there. And then other kind of instances of failure that have been really interesting for me, especially in the last few years, as Very Nice has been growing quite a bit, is learning a lot of the things along the way that you're simply not told. So, for example, when you have employees, you need to have special insurance, you need to pay payroll taxes, you need to make sure that there's toilet paper in the bathroom, you need to have internet, like all these things that I think a lot of millennials, and maybe my own intention when starting this company, you kind of think, oh, I'm going to start a business and I kind of don't need any things or any stuff. I'm just going to kind of have this more remote lifestyle and things like that. And eventually that doesn't always happen depending on what your goals are. So the moment we got like a little bit more physical, kind of literally, I was learning so much and making so many mistakes along the way. That's where, really speaking to the kind of more traditional generations about their business advice as well has been very helpful for me, because that used to be totally commonplace. Is, oh yeah, you have a business, you immediately have employees back then, and you immediately have a nice office or anything like that. That just isn't the case anymore.
Yeah, the idea of kind of that natural progression of like you're finally established when you have an office, an assistant, and a secretary greeting you at the door. I mean, now so many of us have such different working conditions and even workplaces because the products that we're creating is different. We don't have to go clock in and clock out of a company or a factory or a building to actually say that we're productive.
Mm-hmm.
For you, how have you noticed the products and services that you guys are providing? Do you see, I guess, kind of that company culture component of it? How are you able to create a culture around the products, or are the products developed because of the culture that you've created?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what's kind of interesting about Very Nice as a business, and I think this probably is the case for a lot of these millennial enterprises, is that defining what your culture is kind of interesting, because when you think about a company culture, traditionally, you think of like Google or something, where culture is defined by having all these, fluffy bean bags and foosball tables and, cafeteria and stuff like that. But when you're starting a business,
for everyone, that is the best company culture, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, it's funny because it is so different now, where I remember, when it was just me, and then something maybe I haven't mentioned yet is we do have, aside from our team, we have a really robust network of freelancers that we work with remotely as well. And before the team existed, the core team that we have in the office, my culture was kind of me at a coffee shop, and then me sending emails to all these people who I was working with. And so culture has become kind of a really interesting challenge for businesses like ours, because there is no culture in the beginning. There's a brand, but there's not this kind of traditional culture that you would see in a typical company. So as we've kind of grown over the years, what's been interesting is I would say our brand has affected our culture in the sense that everybody working here really cares for our cause and for nonprofits, et cetera. But I would say that more traditional culture, like what kind of furniture do we buy, what do we do at lunch, that kind of stuff, has actually been completely determined by the people that work here. So it just so happens that a lot of the team likes pizza, so we go get pizza on Tuesdays. It's not this mandated thing. It's kind of we're kind of learning from each other's personalities, even down to the music that we play. I think it's kind of fascinating how how different the music that was being selected was at first, and then how it got a little bit more like a set playlist after a couple of years. Just yeah, it's being defined as we speak. It's really
Like,
fascinating.
who keeps putting Shakira on? What is going on back there?
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think that that's a really great comparison because culture is something that when I talk to a lot of millennial focused companies, not necessarily companies owned by millennials, they think, oh yeah, more beanbag chairs, more free beer,
Right.
more popcorn machines.
Mm-hmm.
And they think that it's something that they in a boardroom can put up,
Mm-hmm.
this 3-point plan of creating culture. But what you're talking about is it's very grassroots and it's
Right.
everybody coming together and creating a culture together.
Yeah, and what I like about that to some extent, I think what a lot of companies can learn from that is it becomes very authentic, so the culture really is just true to those people. And to some extent, it's helpful to be a smaller business to be able to do that because, we don't have 1,000 employees, we have like a dozen, so it's a little bit easier to actually, I don't know, like pinpoint where that culture is coming from when you're a bit smaller too, which I think being smaller is actually it's going to be more of the case for a lot of these kinds of businesses.
So you were talking about freelancing, which is
Hmm.
something that's always been around, like contractors and kind of
Hmm.
temp work, but we're seeing a huge rise in freelancing because of technology. And
Right.
not just freelancing, I'll come in and work as a temp, but I'm freelancing for a company in China or,
Hmm.
Guatemala or,
Hmm.
pick somewhere around the world. How do you think that freelancing is going to affect how we as millennials run businesses in the future?
Yeah, I think what's going to happen is, and what I've seen happen is some of the really, really senior level staff, right, will be people that just will refuse to be an employee, that who will want to have that independence of a contractor and will kind of, more and more demand that ability for a flexible work environment and for the ability to travel, et cetera. So I see it changing in terms of new hires that are very senior level, like maybe 10 years of experience, will be harder to actually convert them into employees. And so I think as a result, how a lot of millennial business owners can kind of respond to that is, one, be flexible about that, and two, for the more junior level or entry level employees that you do bring in, really take the time to kind of nurture them and educate them and help them grow into that senior level position, because they'll be even more valuable at that point.
That is incredible advice. So now we have reached the end of our interview. So we're going to jump into our lightning round.
All right.
Quick question. So I hope you're not nervous, but I've got a couple of questions that I ask all of my guests. So are you
Cool.
ready?
Yes.
Okay. So the first question is, what do you know now that you wish that you knew back then when you were starting Very Nice?
Oh man, I would say, well, I think what I wish I knew back then, because of all of the doubt that I had, was that we would be successful. I know that's kind of a lame answer, but I wish that I knew that this model was actually feasible back then. It would have accelerated, I think, a lot of my confidence in it.
But it's pretty hard to know something's going to succeed when you haven't seen a model for it before. But
True.
I say that it's hardest to be the trailblazer. So you guys have
Hmm.
done some pretty incredible work. So
Thank you.
second question is, what is the best piece of business advice that you have ever received?
The best piece of advice that I've ever received was to not take any investment, but instead to earn the dollars that you need by selling your product or service. That was really great advice that was given to me by my family, actually.
That's awesome. That's incredible. And it's interesting, the more interviews that I've done, the more I've learned that many of us come from entrepreneurial families. We've been touched by entrepreneurship in some one way or the other, but as millennials, we're making it our own. But there's always
Hmm.
lessons to learn from people who have gone before us. You
Yeah.
talked a little bit about books that you've read, but
Mhm.
I want to know, what are you reading right now?
Yeah, oh gosh. Well, what's funny is because I'm on a little bit of a break right now. I'm actually like exclusively reading comic books.
I
um,
appreciate that.
yeah, so one that I'm reading right now that I'll bring up. It's called The Incal, Incal. And if anybody likes Star Wars, I hope this doesn't scare away people, but I actually kind of don't like Star Wars. But I love this graphic novel, The Incal, because it's about this crazy alternative universe. I love reading stuff like that because it helps me see our universe in a different way.
And I'm so glad that you said that and you didn't say like a boring business book, although most of my shelves are full of boring business books,
Yep.
because there is something so important about creating something in your mind where creativity can still spark. And as you know, a trained graphic designer, that's the world that you're living into is colors of alternate universes that you can actually create. Okay,
Yeah,
last
absolutely.
question, and it kind of bounces off your last one. So if the 12-year-old version of Matt were to walk into your office right now and meet you, what would he think about what you do for a living?
Oh, you know what? I think that he would be pretty. I think there would be a mixture of being proud and being disappointed. I think when I was 12, I thought, oh, I'm gonna be. There was two goals. I wanted to either be a garbage man, like I wanted to collect. I wanted to drive one of those big garbage trucks, and then I also wanted to be a fine artist. And I think that there would be this combination of like, wow, you have some of your art up on the walls. You can kind of see like over here some of my stuff. And so you're like, yeah, you're doing it, but you're not only doing that. So
I'm
I
pretty
think my 12,
disappointed that you're not driving a garbage truck, Matt.
yeah, that too. Yeah. So I think there would be a
Sometimes being an
mixture.
entrepreneur kind of feels that way, like picking up garbage and taking out garbage. So maybe we can
That's
make a
true.
comparison.
That's true.
That is awesome. Well, Matthew Manos, the founder of Very Nice, thank you so much for taking some time today and talking about your journey and how you are taking a very different approach to being profitable and giving back just as much as you take in. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks again for having me.